This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
This week on Off the Record, violent crime is down in Charlotte compared to last year, but police say violent teens in crime scenes are still a problem. Homelessness is up in Charlotte, and like a lot of other problems, COVID's only making it worse. We'll look at the latest county numbers. School enrollment also up a little compared to last year, but not as much as CMS expected. And as kids mask up for school, COVID cases on campus are dropping. The county health director says that's not a coincidence. Plus, City Hall is rolling out new zoning rules from Charlotte's 2040 plan, and just like the plan itself, not everybody likes what they see. Lots to talk about next on PBS Charlotte. And from our PBS Charlotte studios in historic Plaza Midwood, I'm Jeff Sonnier, and we're off the record talking about the stories you've been talking about this week. And if you watch the news, read the news, and listen to the news, well, you'll recognize the names and faces around our virtual table. Eli Portillo from the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute, Daniel Shemtop from Axios Charlotte, and Mark Becker from WSOC TV. You can also join the conversation at home. Just email your questions and comments to offtherecord at WTVI.org. Crime stats in this week. Every quarter, the police department updates us on the state of affairs when it comes to law and order. And Mark, I know you were there this week when the stats were released for the last quarter, and we're finally starting to get, I guess, a little bit of good news when it comes to Charlotte's violent crime problem.
Yeah, and I couldn't help but be struck by the parallels with our COVID, the other pandemic, right? The numbers are going down gradually. Overall, down 4%, violent crime down 4%. The big numbers everybody looks at, of course, homicides down 18%. I think the raw number there is about 10 fewer than last year, and robberies down. Now, that's good news. But let's put it in some context. Last year was off the charts for homicide, if not a record, very, very close. There was nowhere to go. Well, we hope there was nowhere to go but down. So, yeah, this is good news. I guess guarded optimism would be a way to look at it, right? Let's not get carried away. It could be a whole lot better, but it could be worse too. So we're starting in the right direction. But bottom line, I think we're going to have to see this trend continue probably for the next year or so before we can say we're making some real progress. Police, of course, are happy. Well, happy isn't the right word, but they're glad to see the numbers going down, and they have some theories. But it's good news. But let's just hold on and hope it keeps going.
Eli?
Yeah, I think that perspective is important. You know, there were categories that increased, unfortunately. I think sexual assaults increased 17% reported. Aggravated assaults were up slightly, 2%. And, you know, overall, the homicide number can be very fluky. You know, last year there was that terrible quadruple killing off Beatty's Ford Road. And, you know, something like that where suddenly you have a number jump 4% or jump by 4 total numbers can really skew things. I also think that it's important as we talk about this crime, things like the crime rate, the homicide rate overall in Charlotte, to note that the burden does not fall equally on us. You know, if you look at a map of where the homicides occur, there's that same old crescent and wedge pattern for those people who live in the wedge of Southeast Charlotte. Really just very few, but there are neighborhoods where, you know, there are killings clustered half a dozen. So, you know, we can talk about these overall numbers, but even as the overall number goes down, there are many places in Charlotte that continue to feel this burden and are not seeing a let up in crime and violence, and that, you know, is not it's another inequity in our city.
Yeah, Danielle.
Yeah, I mean, I think the poverty and the socioeconomic factors that fuel this trend, you know, unfortunately, I mean, it's a good thing that it's gone down slightly, but those trends haven't gone away, and those factors haven't gone away. And you have to remember last year, too, we were in the middle of a pandemic that made all of those things worse, that had high unemployment and, you know, huge economic consequences on people. So I think that, you know, we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think.
And I think,
go ahead, Mark. Go ahead.
but well, I was going to say, I think one of the things that they highlighted and the chief talked about in terms of the underlying things going away and the things that they're really focusing on and hoping for is the number of guns that they've taken off the street and the number of guns. They've got this task force trying to limit gun violence, and they do see some positive steps in that direction. And let's hope that's more of the causality and not the symptom, right? And if we can get to the root of it and get some of those guns out of the hands, particularly of young people, I think that's a positive that they see and they're really going after.
Eli?
Yeah, and I think that there also have been just some really terrible high-profile shootings this year. That homicide of the 3-year-old boy in bed at home continues just to be, really heartrending. I have a 3-year-old son myself, and it's unimaginable. And I think until we see that kind of wanton violence addressed, where WFAE, for example, had a report about shootings into occupied homes being up and being drastically up last year and continuing this year. It's those kind of really high profile, senseless things that I think continue to drive people's perception as much or more than the overall number too. So it's also a perception issue.
Yeah, the other thing I thought was interesting, the chief talked about how COVID did have an impact both on last year's numbers and coming out of COVID perhaps had an impact on the most recent numbers. But I think the chief mentioned that as we get back to normal, he thought there was some sort of a connection between the drop in some of that serious and violent crime. But it's also interesting that in the schools, for example, and among young people, that getting back to normal, that getting back into the classroom has kind of sparked more violence back and forth between the schools, the campuses, and the neighborhoods. So I guess COVID helps in some ways and hurts in others. Mark, you want to wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked about young people, and that's another focus here is the youth involved. There was a case just last week where there was an 18 and a 17-year-old charged now with killing a 19-year-old. And that's one of the things that they're talking about. It wraps around the schools. This violence either starts with arguments in schools or ends, let's hope it doesn't, but it ends with a shooting in a school. Talking about getting kids involved, getting kids out of the violence equation is one of the focuses they're working on, and let's hope that works.
Yeah, just to drive home that point you made earlier, when violent crime is down 3 and 4%, in particular homicide down from last year, we're talking about a almost record-setting year, 121 homicides in 2020, and that was one shy of the all-time record, which dates back to 1993. So when you're down a little after a year like we had last year, I guess you'll take the small victory, but you really need to, hope for better and more improvement going forward. So interesting. I want to talk about another report that came out this week, not from the police department, but from the county regarding homelessness and affordable housing. The report came out Thursday and kind of told us what we already knew about homelessness and affordable housing. The Urban Institute was instrumental in putting these numbers together. Eli, you want to take us down that road and tell us what the numbers show us?
Yeah, so this is an annual report that Mecklenburg County and the Urban Institute have partnered to detail what we know about homelessness and housing instability. And housing instability is basically people who are having trouble affording their house, who are paying too much, who might lose their home in the near future. And what we found in this report is that the pandemic has just exacerbated what we knew was already a housing crisis. Basically, a lot of things are coming together here. You've got the low supply of housing, Charlotte's population growth, and then the pandemic on top of that made a lot of people, especially in vulnerable areas like lower income service workers, lose their employment for a long time. So you've got a bunch of trends colliding here. What we've got is a 55% increase in the number of people experiencing homelessness over last year. We're up to over 3,100. There's an estimated 28,000 Mecklenburg County households that are behind on rent, and they owe an average of about almost $3,600. So, that's a lot for people who are already low income to be in the hole. And all those 28,000 households, they are at risk. And it's a big problem that we've had for a long time in this community. And the last year has only made it worse.
Danielle, you've been writing about homelessness and housing on a regular basis. You wrote about the report this week. What are your thoughts on what this report tells us and where we're headed on this?
Yeah, I think everything, in addition to what Eli mentioned about the impacts of the pandemic, it also really highlighted how the cost of living has outpaced wages here. It was, it's no surprise that there was a figure that said, you have to work, I think it's 116 hours on the minimum wage to afford the median rent of about $1,000 a month. But even with other professions, they listed like firefighters and nursing assistants and all these professions that just don't earn enough to make to be able to afford that rent. I think another piece of it too is just showing how we're pouring all this money into affordable housing. I don't think anyone's surprised by these stats, but it does show just how much the problem is growing, even with all of this investment that the city is making. And I think it's going to be a challenge that leaders are going to have to confront. I mean, it's one of the biggest issues at the ballot box every year in the last quite some time. So it's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah, I know a lot of the reporting in the past, a lot of the attention in the past in housing, affordable housing, has been on the poorest of the poor, if you will. But what this report tells us, what you wrote about, is that the poorest of the poor aren't the only ones being affected now by this problem. It's, as you mentioned, cops and nurses and folks that make what we would consider a decent wage, but not enough to really find the kind of housing that those folks ought to deserve and ought to be able to find in this town, right?
Yeah, I think when you talk about low income housing, people think, okay, yes, maybe that's people who aren't working, maybe that's people who are on disability, people have a mental image. And there is a big problem there. There's a 23,000 unit shortage of housing for people who are at the lowest income. But what we also found is there's a lot of people who are in that, not low income, but not very wealthy category who are having to stretch themselves. There are people who are spending, 40, 50% of their income on housing. And that puts you at much higher risk of losing your housing if something goes wrong, if you get an illness, if you have a job loss. And that's really where we see a lot of the pipeline of people who end up losing a house, having to stay with friends, maybe having to go to a shelter. And that number of people who are kind of being pushed and stretched a little at a time, just keeps making this problem worse.
Yeah, this executive summary from the study, it says more than 123,000 Charlotte-Mecklenburg renter and owner households are spending more on housing-related expenses than is affordable. 123,000, that's a city. I mean, that's not a small problem, an isolated problem. That's Gastonia. That's Salisbury, for crying out loud. Go ahead, Danielle. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. So the study defines cost burdened as basically paying more than a third of your income in rent. And it's at 83,000 Mecklenburg County. I believe this was just renters. So that is probably where the 120 or so thousand comes in, with including homeowners. But 83,000 Mecklenburg County residents are cost burdened. And when you look at people who are severely cost burdened, that's about spending about 50% of your income on housing income, and 18% of the county spends 50% or more on their income on housing, and that's just unsustainable in the long run when it comes to building wealth.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, well, just a couple of thoughts. I have not looked at the study, and so I'm not going to speak specifically to it. But in general terms, I don't think this is just a Charlotte or even a North Carolina problem. I mean, I've traveled a little bit, and homelessness. We're talking about the people on the street now. That number's up, but all those that you guys are talking about who are maybe just one or two steps on the other side of that, are almost there. Those are the ones we're talking about, and there's almost an invisible population because they appear to be doing fine, but they may not be, in fact. And the other thing, and I think we need to be aware of this nationally and probably internationally, is inflation, gas prices going up. So, you know, even if your housing costs don't go up, you've got other expenses, and you know, so it's going to be a tough go as we get back into this. And there's going to be a lot more people maybe transitioning, sadly, from that invisible population to the population we do see out there.
You know, homelessness and housing affordability are kind of hand-in-hand problems. And I know since Tent City from last year, and that got so much attention, you know, the county's had a plan to put those folks that were in the Tent City encampment into permanent housing ultimately. But Danielle, you wrote this week that their plan really isn't working, and that others that offer an alternative aren't necessarily being invited to the table. You want to talk a little bit about the effectiveness of what the county's doing now versus maybe the other options that are on the table or could be on the table?
Yeah, so I think, you know, there are different viewpoints on how the county handled the situation. About 38 of the 214 people that were originally moved to hotels have been placed into permanent housing. And the hotel leases expired, as I believe we talked about on a previous show, they expired at the end of last month. And so the remaining residents are still in temporary housing in hotels, and they're saying basically the county's perspective is, you know, it's really difficult to find, like anyone else trying to find affordable housing, it's difficult to find these residents, landlords that will accept them and housing that they can afford, and that, you know, it's obviously if you are homeless, you may have an eviction on your record or something that makes it more difficult. So, you know, they're saying we're doing the best we can. There are some grassroots organizations like the one that I wrote about this week, Heal Charlotte, run by Greg Jackson, who feel like, you know, they could be doing a better job, right? And in his program, he is a similar model. Basically, he houses people in a hotel temporarily and then puts them into permanent housing. He's seen about 60% of the people he's helped gone through his program have gone into permanent housing. And so, you know, he basically expressed his frustrations that the county approached him and then decided not to work with his program. So, you know, he's basically a little frustrated because he feels like, you know, he could help people and the county's choosing not to work with him.
Yeah, I wanted to just follow up on one last thing in this discussion of housing and homelessness. We're coming out of COVID. That means there's funding available from the feds that might not normally be there to address problems that might not normally be there because of COVID. We have an opportunity here, it seems, and I know the report addressed that as well, an opportunity maybe to spend some meaningful dollars and maybe make some meaningful progress. Does anyone have any thoughts on whether that will or can happen, and if there's motivation for that to happen finally because we're coming out of COVID, because that the opportunity of funding is there that might not normally be there?
Yeah, you know, I think the scale of the problem definitely demands more resources. We've seen the Housing Trust Fund bond, which funds most affordable housing construction in Charlotte, increased. You know, that was a few years ago, but we still have a 23,000 unit gap for affordable housing. So the scale of the problem is so big that it's really going to take a lot of resources. There's also, I think, an argument that maybe we'll touch on when we talk about the Unified Development Ordinance, that the private sector needs to be unleashed to build more housing more quickly with fewer regulations to meet this demand. Because I think ultimately this comes down to, in large part, the availability of housing. Mm-hmm. And when our housing inventory is so low, that's going to squeeze everyone, and the people who get squeezed the most are the people at the bottom.
Well, we'll come back and actually let's go ahead and talk about it now. Since you mentioned the 2040 plan and the Unified Development Ordinance, it's a lot of mumbo jumbo for folks who don't follow this stuff on a regular basis. But basically what we're talking about are all those, as you mentioned, rules and regulations that developers will have to follow going forward to go along with this new 2040 plan. And we're hearing from the development community, seeing these regs for the first time, that this is actually going to raise the price of building and raise the price of housing ultimately. That certainly wasn't the intent of the 2040 plan, but could that be the result of it because of all these regulations, Eli?
Well, that was something that we heard from the development community during the debate about all this. I think that developers in general, home builders tend to be allergic to more regulations. Their kind of default position, understandably, is fewer regulations. developers I've talked to say, hey, you require more wider sidewalks, different kinds of piping, different kinds of design features. Maybe each of those is 1,000, 2,000, but you put 50 of them on me, that's going to raise the price of your house by a lot. I think that the counter argument is if those are applied to everyone, all developers are facing more regulations, they'll find a way to make it work. It's when you apply it selectively and say, developer A, you have to build something more expensive, developer B, you don't, that there might be more issues. Mm-hmm. But I think ultimately, we don't really know yet. The development rules are still being written. And once they're written, we saw a huge spike in the price of lumber this past year. I think that added more to housing costs than any of these developments. So a lot of it's going to come down to the market too.
Mark?
Yeah, I was going to jump in on that. I mean, yes, the cost of building has gone up. I mean, we're doing a project at home, and yeah, it is more expensive, and that's a real cost. And developers can, it's going to cost. Bottom line, it's going to cost more now. 20 years from now, 2040, I don't know what the price levels will look like, but probably higher. And at the same time, I mean, developers sort of have this litany, right, where, it's going to cost us more, it's going to cost us more. Farmers have their litanies. We all have our own, sort of woe is me kind of thing. And sometimes it ends up being that bad, sometimes it's not. But I would only expect them to say this is going to cost more because, as you say, they may be allergic to regulations, Eli. But listen, you got to do something, right? You got to try something. And so, yeah, I think they're pushing the plan pushes in this direction, and we'll just see where it goes. But we got to try something.
Yep. This is not the last. I'm sorry, Danielle. Why don't you wrap it up for us? Yeah.
No, it's all right. I think that this is not. I mean, yeah, this is not surprising that they're making this argument. They made this argument throughout the 2040 plan. Other communities that I know we're not talking about impact fees, so this might be a bit of an apples and oranges. But for example, that's one thing they were specifically very opposed to within the plan. And other communities that have had fees or that have larger kind of fees for any kind of development, whether it is these things like trees and stormwater. There hasn't been a mass exodus of development from those places like Atlanta, for example. If anything, it's the opposite. It's hard to know, is it impacting the cost there? It might be a little bit, but as you said, there's a lot of other factors that impact the cost. I think it's too early to know exactly how these regulations will affect the cost. But, the city is also trying to balance all these priorities, right? They want trees, they want sidewalks. As we know, there's poor sidewalk infrastructure in many areas. So it's just a balance of priorities versus kind of making sure that there aren't all of these additional regulations, and how do you kind of strike the right balance? And I guess that's the job of the city staff, basically.
Yeah, complicated problems require complicated solutions, and that's what we have here. Early in the process, that never stopped us from talking about it before, but I'm sure we'll be talking about these rules and regulations again as we go forward and see more on them. A lot of this stems from growth. I saw a number this week that says expectations 50% larger. That's how big Charlotte will be by the year, 2050. And one thing that I thought stuck out this week is that CMS growth is kind of flat. They expected a rebound from post-COVID in terms of kids coming back to school that may have moved to other schools, but they're not seeing that. Any thoughts on this kind of flatlining of growth in public schools in Charlotte-Mecklenburg and what it means for the school system and for the community? Anybody want to take that one on?
Well, in the short term, right, the dollars follow the kids. Yeah. So you have more kids, you as a system get more dollars. So yeah, there's a concern, right? And I think they were up like 0.2%, but they were expecting and certainly hoping for more than that. Meanwhile, put that in a little context, some of the neighboring counties, the bedroom communities of Union County and now they are going up, right? So they're getting some of those students, but I think a bunch of those students, and I don't have a number, but I just anecdotally could tell you a bunch are going to charter schools, some going to parochial private schools. But yes, there are not as many kids as they would like at CMS. And one other interesting fact, the study or the numbers show is that Latino kids are that population was up, but white kids of color up, White students, fewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The suburban counties saw the kind of growth that Mecklenburg was expecting. Mecklenburg didn't see the growth. They added, what, 300 or 400 more students? I think it was 400 more students than they had last year, but they were expecting thousands more. I guess long term, it makes you wonder if folks are maybe looking at the quality of the schools as well as all those other factors and all those other options. Anyone want to?
Yeah, and I think
go ahead.
I think it's tough to say, this pandemic is still going on. There's mask controversies here. There are people, who might say, well, geez, I've been thinking about going to Union County, and now this mask thing is making me ready to pull the trigger on that. Just anecdotally, people I know, I've heard of people getting calls from, Montessori programs and pre-K programs just saying, hey, the people who we had expected aren't showing up. You're on a wait list. Do you want your kid to get in? And having the chance to take that. So I think that there is still, there's still growth holding steady, but are we going to look back in 5 years and say this is a blip, or is this the start of a trend? I mean, that's the big question with all these pandemic trends that I just don't think we can answer yet.
Yeah, that is the question. Is this a pandemic thing that's going to, eventually go away, or is this the beginning of something larger and maybe more troubling to the school system and the community at large? As usual,
is it a blip or a bleep? That's the question.
Yeah. Again, another question and another a topic we can discuss on a future show, but as usual, we've got more topics than we've got time, so we're going to have to call it quits for this weekend. Thanks, gang, for being here this week. And at home, thank you for joining us as well. Anytime you want to comment on what we talk about here, or you have questions of your own, just send them to offtherecord@wtvi.org. We appreciate you being with us this week, and we'll see you next time on Off the Record.
A production of PBS Charlotte.